This is FirstCoast.tv. We find ourselves here with Caren Goldman. Now, Caren Goldman, we know you, or FirstCoast.tv knows you, mostly because of your involvement with Compassion at St. Augustine. So whether it's the Obelisk or other events that we've been to, we've ran into you. So I guess now we're getting to know you as an author. And I was impressed. There's quite a few books, and they're all in the spiritual genre. And so my question to you is, today's event was basically what? A lot of people came to this event, and why were they here?
Well, I think the fact that I had, there were two anthologies that came out this year, and both of them included my stories in them. Basically, the fact is that most of the writers in both of these anthologies are people who read spiritual books, people who read books for self-help, self-healing, that are interested in the intersections of psychology, healing, and spirituality, would recognize most of the names in those books. And so I think that's what drew several people. The fact that we were doing this book signing for Compassion at St. Augustine, and all of the proceeds were going to our programs for underserved and vulnerable children, was another reason that people came. But what I noticed in the course of the evening in terms of the books that I was signing, that there were people who basically have started in terms of their introduction to me as an author, looked at my book Healing Words. And
can you show me the cover?
Sure, be glad to.
Healing Words. Okay, that book is very, very popular?
It's very popular. It came out officially came out in 2001, and it's been on the market from the publishers for 15 years now. And the impetus for me writing this was the fact that my entire career has been writing for newspapers and then national magazines that were dealing with those intersections of healing psychology, spirituality, all national magazines. And in 1999, the end of 1999, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I realized that for all of the articles that I had written for all these magazines, I had never written them from the perspective of being a patient. And I was very, very fortunate. I caught it very early, and I had a phenomenal medical team. But I also have been writing about complementary alternative medicine through the late 80s and 90s, when it was really exploding for the very first time. And
also that New Age movement also was big,
right,
too.
Which really got co-opted in a lot of ways, a whole other conversation. But when it first started in the late 60s and 70s, it really was talking about a new age for so many things.
Right.
And then everything became kind of new agey kind of thing. But the fact is that I wanted to write about my experience, but I wanted to do it in a way that almost in a sense hadn't been done at that point in time. And that was to be able to give people something that they could use to gain a sense of personal control in a very out of control situation. And there were books on breast cancer. I mean, I've got a book on breast cancer that I did for Prevention Magazine and all of that, but there wasn't something that gave people a resource for being able, in a sense, if you will, to be able to empower themselves and be able to take a degree of self-control, self-responsibility, all of that. And so what this book did was it took a word and it put it on one page, and there were quotes, there's an affirmation, there's a short anecdote, that type of thing. And what I immediately found was that it was being used in hospitals and with groups. It was being used by clergy for sermons. It was being used by individuals. And it was being used all over the world. It's been translated into other languages. And it just keeps going as one of those resources. I have loads of stories that I could tell you about. The one I think that made a real point to me that I would not have known or experienced in another way. In the early 2000s, a close friend of mine was diagnosed with breast cancer right after she had her second child. And it was very aggressive, and we knew that the prognosis was not necessarily going to be great. And of course, I gave her a copy of it. And about a year and a half later, we were both going to a breast cancer event around the race in Toledo, Ohio. And Debbie came running up to me. She said, I'm off of chemo and all of that. She said, but I got to tell you a story. I said, what's that? And she said, your book was with me all the way. And this is the first week that I looked at your book and I didn't throw up. And I said, what kind of compliment is that? And she said, no, when I was going through chemo, and that was back in the days when they didn't have quite the forms of chemo that they have now.
It wasn't as caliber as it is now.
She said that book was with her as she was actually hanging over and not being able to control herself. And very sadly, she called me on the way home from that, and she was in a panic. And she had just heard that her breast cancer had spread, and she now had literally breast cancer in her brain. And she died within the year. But she left a beautiful legacy in terms of all of that. And I felt so honored that the book was part of that and what happened with it. But it's just one of those things that has blessed me over and over again. I hear from people around the world all the time, and all of that. So a lot of people were interested. Yeah, even people who didn't come here tonight have said, please put copies aside for me, that kind of thing, which was really nice.
And that other book that you have there, show that one to the camera really quick.
That's called
Bring Lives, Missing Pieces. Yeah, that one took an award in 2011.
It did. It was named one of the best spiritual books of that year.
Great.
And I was in amazing company with it. The book looks at why we have a desire to reunite with people, places, things, and ultimately what that means about our desire to pull those missing pieces of ourselves together so that we can feel more whole. And what started it off was I was interested in why people were looking at Facebook. And the obvious thing is, well, they want to reconnect with old friends and all of that other thing. But most of my writing has to do with how is it that we can live those really hard questions. So the obvious was that people wanted to reconnect with their high school friends and all of the things that the internet has really allowed to happen.
And stuff like that,
but I was asking the question that it's great to be able to say you want to reunite with people that way, but why? And so it was the why questions going to all these different levels in terms of why are we doing this? It's not just something superficial. There is a deep yearning within us, and what does that yearning look like, and how can we get to understand that yearning more so that we can recall those pieces of our lives and in a sense have a better sense of who ultimately we are as a result of them either being here or not here at any point in our lives. Why do we want to go back to a particular place? Well, I grew up there and all those kinds of questions. There's something much more deep That's at the heart of it. And different people will explain that different ways. They'll say there's a spiritual yearning, or there's a kind of sense of just wanting to put something together that they can't describe. And that's what the book does. It goes down into all of those layers through stories, through looking at some of the things that have happened scientifically with brain science and whatnot.
And my other question for you would be, so about how many titles do we have?
How many titles? Well, if I look at the table, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 titles.
Wow. And we can find these on Amazon or Barnes and Nobles and places like that?
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for giving us this little time to get to know the author, Caren Goldman. And it's very interesting, and the books all seem, by the amount of people that were here, it's something they like very much.
Well, you're kind. Thank you very much for saying that.
You're very welcome.
I so appreciate what you're doing with First Coast TV. I really do.
And so, yes, we'll let people get to know you a little better from the author side, and we thank you very much.
Well, thank you.